Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
Ready? 1. You will do this 4 times with the left, 4 with the right, then 8 times with both, then repeat.
It's the FantasyGreek.com starts and sits in 60 minutes, the Week 6 edition, and you're headed toward the midpoint of your fantasy football season. Now you need help, now more than ever. From 87 Sports fans, I am Keith Grieve, and joining me as always in the co-pilot chair is the Fantasy Greek himself, Jim Sarantias from thefantasygreek.com. Jim, how are you this weekend?
Keith, I'm doing great. Just doing great. Wonderful. The Cubs are going to the NLCS, so I'm very excited for them. Excited for my good friend over there, the hitting coach, John Malley, who has just really done a great job turning that team around. And I'm excited for Week 6 because I got to tell you, Keith, we've got some injured running backs coming back this week. Even though I'll say there were a bunch of players that came up on the injury report that I was really shocked. But I think this is a time to be excited about things just generally.
Well, it depends on where you're sitting. If you're the 2-time defending champion of your league that's now fallen to 2-3 on a 3-game losing streak, it is time to panic almost. Not that I'm talking about anybody in particular. I'm just asking for a friend. So, yeah, this is my little pity.
I'll be your friend, Keith.
Yeah, my little pity play. My craptastic 2016 also extends to our record picking games as well, as you opened up a 3-game increase on your lead. You now have picked 40. You're up to 45 correct picks through 5 weeks. I am at 38. Where we differed, where you made the difference, is you picked the Cardinals. I thought for Chip Kelly would get off the schneid, and see the error of my ways there. I did not believe the Colts had enough to beat the Bears. I thought the Bears had also turned a corner when you had taken the Colts. I was right about the Cowboys beating the Bengals, but you were right about the Bills beating the Rams and the Raiders over the Chargers. Where we both whiffed was the Redskins beating the Ravens. We both picked Baltimore in that game. We both had the Lions beating the Eagles, and we both had the Dolphins beating the Titans and the Broncos beating the Falcons. And you see the fallout of the Ravens' struggles with offensive coordinator Mark Trestman getting the axe.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, see ya. Don't let the door hit you. And, it worked for Buffalo. Maybe it'll work for the Ravens. Who knows? So that's it. Like I said, it's 45-38. So how this works, folks, is that Jim and I go through all of the weekly matchups in the NFL, and we pick the games, and Jim gives you his wisdom on who to start and who not to start. If at any time you have lineup issues of yourself, of your own that you would like to share with us, the phone number is 585-633-7487. That's 585-633-7487. Or you can hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag AskTFG. That's, once again, hashtag AskTFG. So, Jim, like I've asked the last couple weeks, was there anything that drove you nuts last week? Is there anything that stood out from last week? It's kind of like, I didn't see that coming.
You did ask me this last week, and for the life of me, I told myself, prepare for that question, and I have done no such thing. I'll tell you one thing that bugged me, and that was the Giants. I did not see the whooping that they got at the hands of the Packers coming. I really thought I believe that they would lose the game, which I believe I predicted right. But the Packers had been giving up roughly about 300 yards passing and 3 TDs per game going into that game. And I thought, here's the turnaround for Eli Manning, Odell Beckham Jr., and he did score a touchdown, so that's a good thing. But on 54 yards receiving, I believe, they whiffed. They were awful.
The Giants are in trouble offensively, real trouble.
Yeah. And, it also made me think about the sort of turmoil that went through in the offseason, getting rid of Tom Coughlin, elevating Ben McAdoo, and you just kind of sit here and go. And I was watching him on the sidelines in that game, and or maybe it was the game before, and that guy's working really hard. I mean, you could see it in his face and whatever he's doing, and I thought, man, he's doing a lot of work for a head coach.
Well, the guy's under the gun.
The head coach calling the plays. I mean, Mike McCarthy doesn't work that hard.
Right. But he's under a lot of pressure. He's replacing a 2-time Super Bowl champ who was summarily pushed into retirement, and then only to see, because the criticism of the Giants last year was that offensively Coughlin wasn't the guy, and time for a change. So they fire Coughlin, and then they just elevate the guy that was in charge of the offense last year. And outside of Odell Beckham Jr., I mean, Sterling Shepard has flashed, but there's really been no sense of consistency from the Giants' offense at all this year.
Yeah.
And with the Broncos, it's Paxton Lynch getting under center, but their running game has stalled. If you're a C.J. Anderson fan or owner, you have to be frustrated at that. And I'm a little worried from a fantasy standpoint. I know we don't worry about defenses all that much, but the Eagles got a little shredded last week coming off a bye. I didn't really see that happening.
Well, I've been toying with my fantasy quarterbacks, and for example, I have Blake Bortles, who doesn't have a bad matchup, I think, against the Bears this weekend, especially coming out of their bye week. And I think he's got another good game next week and maybe the week after, and then things get really tough for him. But then Carson Wentz gets a soft part of his schedule. And who did the Eagles play again? They played the Redskins. The Redskins are a tough team to call, especially when they're playing at home. And, that's one of those things. I know I sat him last week. Or no, I did play him. He did have a couple of fantasy-wise. He didn't have a bad game. It just wasn't a great game. The team lost. In any case, I mean, it's one of those things. There's going to be a little growing pains for the Eagles, but I thought they would be 5-0 myself, or 4-0, whatever.
All right. So without further ado, let's launch into the Week 6 outlook here. And
that was good. That was that good, right?
Yes. It was so good that I felt that it didn't need to be touched anymore. We're just going to segue on into what's coming up this coming week. Thursday night game, the AFC West matchup, the Denver Broncos at the San Diego Chargers last week. The Broncos losing by a touchdown to the Atlanta Falcons, 23-16. And the Chargers losing to Oakland, 34-31. Their last 3 games, the Chargers have lost by 4. They've lost by 1. They've lost by 3. And now they host Denver with a top-notch defense. Yes, they lost last week, but Atlanta came into with the top-ranked offense coming in, and they held them to 23 points, which sounds like Atlanta was lighting the world on fire. Just the offense couldn't keep up for the Broncos. So now here we have this big division matchup. Looking at how the teams match up, obviously defensively, the Broncos have a big advantage. However, you should not take the Chargers lightly, and the Chargers are only allowing 83 yards per game on the ground, and that's so depending on who's under center. And I don't think I've seen an injury report yet on this game. Have you, Jim? As far as
no, I have not. But I mean, there, like I said, there's a bunch of players coming up today on injuries. I don't know if you're thinking of anybody specifically.
Just quarterback for Denver.
My understanding is Trevor Siemian's playing.
Okay, so Siemian will be under center. So you don't have the rookie angle going here, but San Diego does give up some yards through the air, but they're stalwart on the ground. And the Broncos are just they give up $115 on the ground, but they're only giving up 185 through the air. Phillip Rivers is that veteran quarterback that understands what you're doing to him defensively. Looking at the offense and going forward, the Chargers are passing for 282 a game. Something's got to give there. They're also rushing for almost 90 a game, or a little over 90 a game. The Broncos have averaged 101 as a team per game. Looking at just scoring, the Chargers are putting up 30 points per game. I mean, that's not nothing. It's a division game at home. I'm not a big believer in this Broncos offense. I'm going to take the Chargers at home to win this game.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the Broncos and that formidable defense that they have. You look back at the history of Phillip Rivers against the Broncos, and it's either he has an awful game or he has an okay game, like 250 yards, 2 TDs, or he throws for 250 and 0 TDs and a couple of interceptions. With the defense as it is today, he just hasn't had that ultimate success. Now, that doesn't mean they can't win the football game. However, I think this is a week where we're going to see the rushing game for the Broncos actually excel a little bit. It's a favorable matchup. The Chargers are giving up, let's see here, the second most fantasy points to the position. And while C.J. Anderson has been struggling, I came across a great article today from Mike Kleiss over at 9 News in Denver. You can find it on my Twitter page or the Fantasy Greeks Twitter page. A few articles down, a few tweets down, and it has to do with one of the offensive linemen for the Broncos, a right tackle named Donald Stevenson, who went down to injury in Game 2 against the Colts. Since then, the running game has struggled. They've not been very effective. Even Devonta Booker hasn't been all that, and he's coming back this week. So I think there's a genuine opportunity for that ground game to get going. It's the way that they're going to win the football game, and therefore I like their chances of winning this game at home. From a fantasy perspective, I like C.J. Anderson as an RB2. You keep starting Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders are doing enough in the passing game to be fantasy relevant as wide receiver 2s or wide receiver 3s. Denver Broncos defense a must start, weekly must start. Just start them, forget about it. And then over on the Chargers side, it's a little bit shakier. I identify in our quarterback stardom sit-ems this week a group of 4 quarterbacks you can consider starting over Phillip Rivers because it's a risky start. If he's your QB1, you really need to consider your backup. I like Melvin Gordon. I think we're going to get a healthy dose of him. Travis Benjamin is a wide receiver 3. I would sit Terrell Williams. I think he's going to be shut down this week. As far as Antonio Gates and the young kid Hunter, I think they're probably both low-end TE1s at best. It's just I think this is going to be a rough game, so I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on them. But if you have to start them, you could do much worse. Take the Broncos at home.
All right. The San Francisco 49ers at the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills sitting at just one game back of the New England Patriots at first place in the AFC East. Last week beating the Rams 30-19 in Los Angeles. San Francisco 1-4, losers of their last 3, losing last week to the Cardinals 33-21. These two teams offensively are very similar statistically, not scheme-wise or anything like that, but statistically. On defense, there's one stat you need to be aware of. The 49ers give up 146.8 yards per game on the ground. The Bills are going to love that. I'm going to take the Bills at home.
Yeah, this should be a good game for the Bills. Keith, I'm going to pick them at home, but I also want to, for the listeners out there, if you haven't done what I'm about to tell you to do, go do it right now. Every few weeks, I always look at the rankings of every fantasy football league that I'm in, because sometimes when you just look at players, you miss out on what I'm about to tell you. You look at the rankings, and inevitably, in every league, there's like one player that's sitting there who's like a top player. And for some reason, they're on waivers. And they've been on waivers for days. Somehow, everybody's missing them. And go do that. Last week, I was able to get Adam Vinatieri. And in, I think, all fantasy leagues, he got, where I played him, he got me over 20 fantasy points in each league. And today, I got Stephon Diggs. And I bring this up because one of the players I was able to add, it was either at the end of last week or right at the beginning of this week, where I have one league where there's no waiver process. You just go and get as you please. The Bills defense, they're ranked in some leagues number 2. And if they're out there on your waivers, you need to roster them, especially if you have one of these struggling defenses. They're playing some good football right now, and they're an absolute must start this weekend against the 49ers offense that is struggling, where Colin Kaepernick's going to quarterback, and I wouldn't be scared of that. I mean, people haven't seen him in a while, but it's not like he's going to suddenly morph into something we've never seen before. He's going to be working within Chip Kelly's offense. And the best I can tell, he's rusty. I mean, if he's not practicing, he has not played this year because he's not practicing well. And the only reason they're giving him a shot is because they're just not getting it done with Blaine Gabbert. So for me, that is very good for the Bills' defense, which bodes well for their offense. I love LaShawn McCoy this week. He is a top 5, top 6 fantasy play. Charles Clay is, I suppose, a streaming option as a tight end, even though I think he could do better. A guy that I think I'm going to call this week a deep sleeper, and the reason why he's a deep sleeper is I've seen him dropped in many fantasy football leagues, is Robert Woods. This is a 49ers defense that is struggling against the passing game, and there is no reason why. I think they're giving up at least one passing TD per game to wide receivers. There's no reason why he can't be that guy this week. For the 49ers, the only guy I like is Carlos Hyde. I would even stay away from Jeremy Curley. I know he's been great, and a lot of people picked him up this week, but I think this matchup is awful. And then Tyrod Taylor, I love him as a low-end QB1, and I would even start him ahead of Phillip Rivers. Go Buffalo.
All right. The Chicago Bears welcome the Jacksonville Jaguars in the battle of the cellar dwellers. The 1-4 Bears, the 1-3 Jaguars, trying to figure out
enjoy your phone.
Where
You too.
and there goes the auto ads. Thank you. Trying to analyze this game. Jim, if I told you to guess which quarterback had more yards passing on the season, Blake Bortles or Brian Hoyer, who would you guess?
I would say it's going to be Brian Hoyer.
Well, probably because you're a well researched and prepared host. But normal people probably would guess Blake Bortles, and they'd be wrong because Brian Hoyer is the correct answer. That just blows my mind. And so all of this talk about Jay Cutler not having a guaranteed job is warranted because the first 2 games were hideous with Jay Cutler under center. All the talk Ian Rappaport from NFL Network has said about this is Brian Hoyer's job to win have to be completely true. Just because look at the numbers. It's just that simple. But the Bears aren't winning games for a variety of reasons. And number one, first and foremost, is that they're giving up 25 points a game on defense. They're also giving up over $118 on the ground. It just can't happen. You're not going to win many football games. The only thing going good for the Bears is that they've held their opponents to 38% third down completion. The Jaguars are awful at that as well, but they're allowing 45% completion. For a defensive-minded head coach like Gus Bradley, the stats like that just kind of boggle my mind and wonder what's going on in Jacksonville. Looking at offensively, the Jags do put up some points, 21 points a game. The Bears have struggled to score. The Bears have found a running game recently with Jordan Howard. Well, something's got to give. So what's my call here? The Bears are home, and that's the only reason I'm going to pick the Bears to beat the Jaguars.
Yeah, I like the Bears too this week. This was a hard game to look at because I thought to myself, the Jaguars are coming out of this bye week. This is a week for them to sort of, try and right the ship. But with the way that Brian Hoyer has been playing, in the Bears' defense is good enough to keep them in the game. I don't know that Blake Bortles has 4 TDs in him this weekend. I think Brian Hoyer has at least 2, probably 3, and Jordan Howard has at least 1, which is why I'm sort of where I am with how the scoring should sort of fall. From a fantasy perspective, this is projected to be an above average scoring game. So both Blake Bortles and Brian Hoyer are starts. I like Blake Bortles just ahead of Brian Hoyer only because he's had one more week to prepare for this game. I love Jordan Howard. I think he's a top 10, top 12 start this week, despite what on paper looks like a difficult matchup. He's just so essential in both the running and passing game. He should be good for 100 all-purpose yards and a score. You're going to keep Alshon Jeffrey active. I love Cameron Meredith. He's started opposite Alshon Jeffrey when we saw how he did last week with over 100 yards receiving and a score. I think you keep him active as a low-end wide receiver 3 or a flex play, depending what kind of league that you are in. Zach Miller makes for a low-end TE1 start. As far as the rest of the Jaguars, Allen Robinson, start him. He should be targeted heavily. I mean, I think they're going to throw so much that Besides Blake Bortles having a great game, Allen Robinson stands to finish as a top 10, top 12 player. I like Julius Thomas as a low-end TE1. Allen Hurns I would stay away from. As far as defenses are concerned, Jaguars I'd stay away from. I know some people have talked about streaming the Bears, and I just think there's better streaming options than the Bears. To me, if you're starting the Bears, you're sort of it's a little bit of a desperation play in fantasy. But I'll take the Bears at home in this one.
All right, the Los Angeles Rams travel to the Detroit Lions. The Lions are sitting at 2-3. The Rams are 3-2. Better than we thought they would be, right, guys? Trying to see how these teams stack up. The Lions are the better team offensively. Any way you look at it, they're moving the ball for 350 yards per game. Yes, they are a pass-heavy offense. They're also scoring almost 24 points per game. The Rams' offense is almost non-existent, just above 16 points per game offensively. Defensively, the Rams are slightly better statistically, but not enough to make a difference. The Lions are home. I'm taking the Lions.
Yeah, this is going to be another game that's going to be high scoring, and I will take the Lions at home as well. This should be a make it right sort of game for the Lions. Matt Stafford a must start. Theo Riddick has a really good matchup. I like him this week. You got to get him active. Marvin Jones should be active. At that point, turning over to the Dolphins, one of the things that I don't like about them is, well, obviously, I'm not a believer in Ryan Tannehill. I don't know that Adam Gase is either anymore. What we should see in this matchup is we should see a heavy dose of Arian Foster. It sits right. I mean, he'll be involved in both the running and...
Wait, we're talking about the Rams and Lions still, right?
Oh, hold on one second. I'm so sorry.
You jumped ahead of me here.
I did.
One game at a time, Jim. One game at a time.
You're right. Hold on. Well, I'm going to take the Lions. I'm still taking them at home. So for the Rams, I obviously like Todd Gurley. You keep playing him. I know he's not giving you the super fantasy Astro points that you wanted from him, but the reality is he's still that talent and he still has that opportunity to blow it up. And there's plenty of time in the fantasy season. A player that I like that I don't know if you tell me, Keith, if this is a sleeper or a deep sleeper, is Tavon Austin. The Lions are giving up a bunch of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And what's interesting is 70% of those points are coming from yards after the catch. And that is something that just reeks Tavon Austin. So if you have him and you've been sitting like, I don't know when to play him, this is the time to play him. Definitely as a flex, certainly as a wide receiver 3. Is he a sleeper? Is he a deep sleeper, Keith?
I'd say deep sleeper.
Okay, well then he's a deep sleeper, and I'm calling it right here, and I'll talk about it more in my article on USA Today.
It's just hard to believe that all of a sudden that they're going to figure out how to make him fantasy relevant. Anyway.
Well, I don't think that they're going to figure it out. I think they're going to just do what they're doing and find that they're very successful against the Lions. That's it.
Fair enough. Pittsburgh Steelers travel to Miami. Now we're going to talk about the Dolphins now, Jim. Okay.
Thank you.
Pittsburgh. Look, comparing this team, there really is no comparison. The Steelers are the better team. Miami might, be headed in the right direction under first-year head coach Adam Gase. But as far as this year, there's really nothing good to think about if you're a fan of the teal and orange. The stats to really look at here: the Dolphins allow $150 on the ground, and I don't know if you've heard, but the Steelers have some guy Le'Veon Bell. Bodes really well for them. Oh, and that guy Roethlisberger ain't bad either. I'm taking the Steelers on the road here.
Everything about this game reeks Pittsburgh Steelers win, and it reeks it should be sort of a lopsided win, meaning at least by 2 touchdowns. Big Ben, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. I like Jesse James. I know some people don't like him, but I think not only will he get his 50, but he'll get another score this week. I think they're all players that you can play in fantasy. With Jesse James, more of a low-end TE1. Or if you flex 2 positions, he's a guy you can consider for the flex. Sammy Coates is a guy to monitor. He came up in the injury report today. Apparently he had sort of a small cast on his hand. It was really strange. there was no description of a broken bone, but rather a cut of some sort. And I thought, then why would you cast it? In any case, monitor him, because if he gets to play, he is a must-start as well this week. Steelers defense, they're going to be a great go, and I know they're available in a few leagues. So if you need the help, like if you have the Panthers, go get the Steelers and start them with confidence this week. For the Dolphins, this is where Arian Foster comes in. Pittsburgh's giving, I think, roughly about 700. They've given up 700 all-purpose yards, something like that, to the position during the course of the season. It's a pretty even split between running and receiving, and that's perfect for Arian Foster. I know the Dolphins will have to sort of play from behind, but at least in the beginning of the game, they're going to try and get him going in terms of the running game, and he'll have to be involved in the passing game, so I really like him. You start Jarvis Landry, especially in PPR leagues, as your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Outside of that, it's I'm not a big believer in Ryan Tannehill. I suppose you could sit there and say, well, if they're going to get behind, he's going to throw the football a lot, so he has a possibility of 2 TDs or 3. I mean, if you believe that, you really want to stream him, go right ahead. But I think that that's still a risky proposition. Terrible Towns win one on the road.
All right, the Cincinnati Bengals travel to New England in Tom Brady's return to Foxborough, his first game home in the Great Northeast. If anybody that thought Brady was going to be a little bit rusty, well, you ate crow, and you ate crow heavily on Sunday, as the Patriots lit up the Browns for 33 points and en route to a 33-13 win. The Bengals losing to the Dallas Cowboys 28-14. Let me just pose it to you this way. If they were able to give up 28 points to the Dallas Cowboys and a rookie quarterback, what do you think they're going to do as far defensively against New England and Tommy Touchdown in Foxborough? First game back, electric atmosphere. There's no way Cincinnati wins this game. I'm picking the Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, how do you go against Tom Brady? I want to say the Bengals have given up roughly 11 pass TDs to the position, so let's just start right there. You already mentioned the homecoming that he's going to be having. So, people are going to be amped up. The defense is going to be amped up. You're gonna love your Patriots this week. I mean, all of them are playable in one shape or form. The passing game should really thrive in this game. If there's anything to worry about is, what we saw last week, Martellus Bennett scores 3 TDs with Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski don't do as well. Are we going to see the same of that, or is he going to start spreading the ball around? And I think they're going to spread the ball around because this is a pretty good Bengals defense. I just don't think that they can keep up. LeGarrette Blount, James White, they're both options this week, but I think they're both more or less flex plays as opposed to RB2s. For the Bengals, this is a tough – I mean, it's hard to like anybody here. I was just checking Jeremy Hill's injury status because Gio Bernard actually had a pretty good game last week. And he seems to be more of the complete running back for that team. And they need help in the passing game. Believe it or not, Andy Dalton's first multi-TD game was last week. He had, previous to that, had games of 1 touchdown, and then one game he threw 0 touchdowns. So, he's not doing well. And Tyler Eifert, despite reports that he's close to getting back, doesn't seem to be back. And until he gets back, I think they're going to be stuck. So the Patriots are going to win this. As far as Bengals fantasy players, AJ Green is always a threat to put up some big yards in a score. I'd avoid Andy Dalton if you can, unless, again, you believe, well, it's going to be a high-scoring game, which it will be, and he's going to have some opportunity to throw up some numbers. But I think between the yards and turnovers, that won't be pretty. The Patriots defense I like this week. And between the running backs, Gio Bernard and Jeremy Hill, I mean, they're both, I think, really weak RB2s, flex plays. And that's how it goes. Patriots win.
The Carolina Panthers travel to the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are sitting at a rather disappointing 1-3. The Carolina Panthers, as far as disappointments go, 1-4. Actually looking up at the Saints in the standings. Go ahead, raise your hand if you had that going forward. Yes, I know last week they were without Cam Newton, suffering from the effects of a concussion against Jameis Winston and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday night in a 17-14 loss. The big question is, does he make it back? He was a limited participant in practice today, so keep your eye on that. I would think he'd clear protocols by Sunday, but keep your eye on that because that will change greatly, in my opinion, the Panthers' feasibility in this game. Looking at this team and how they match statistically, of course, what I'm about to say changes greatly with whether it's Derek Anderson or Cam Newton under center. But the Saints, we all know the Saints don't like to run the ball, so obviously the Panthers run the ball better. The Saints are actually scoring 28 points per game, the Panthers 24. On defense, though, obviously the Panthers would be better, like we all assume. The Saints don't like to run the ball, and they don't like to play defense. It's just that simple. The Saints are giving up 32 points per game, but the Panthers haven't really been stalwart either at 27 points per game. Here's the part that scares me. The Saints give up $121 on the ground, and even without Cam Newton, the Panthers are going to want to run the ball. It's just that simple. They also allow 301 yards through the air. So the problem that I have in picking this game is that I don't know what Carolina is. We knew what they were last year, but we don't know what they are offensively, and defensively they've fallen off a little bit. The Saints are an equal amount of craptastic mess because we all know that they're a one-trick pony. That they pass the ball, but they're scoring. They're putting up 4 touchdowns a game. They're home. It's a division game. I'm going to take the Saints, but I don't feel good about it.
Keith, I'm going to take the Saints as well, and I'm taking them because this game's not setting up exactly right for the Panthers on the road. And what I mean by that is the Saints have only given up 5 passing TDs to quarterbacks. Where they're struggling is in their rush defense, which, I mean, it's horrible. Right? They're just awful. They are giving up a mountainous 9 TDs to the position, which is where most of the scoring is going. And Jonathan Stewart's making his way back this week. And that's assuming everything goes well at practice and that nothing changes. And I don't know that J. Stu is going to be ready for the kind of load that it would take to sort of run all over these the Saints without a little bit of help. And I don't know how much help he's going to get. So I'm going to take the Saints at home. It's going to be a high-scoring game. So this is where you do want to get everybody up on the field that you can. Drew Brees, Mark Ingram, Brandon Cooks, Coby Fleener, Willie Snead. I think Michael Thomas makes sense as a flex. You flip it over to the Panthers. Obviously, you start Cam Newton. I know I had mentioned the 5 TDs, but he should be poised to get at least one of those, and even a rushing TD, and maybe a second throwing TD. At least he's in the position to, which is why he's still a solid QB1 as far as the matchup is concerned. J. Stu is a must-start if he's active, and if for some reason he doesn't play, Cameron Hunter's paying. Cameron broke through last week, and what's funny is a lot of people dropped him because of the whole thought Cameron, Jonathan Stewart's coming back. So, keep an eye out on this injury status because you might have to run out and go get Cameron Artis-Payne, and he make a good start in any league. Greg Olsen should have a monster game. Kelvin Benjamin is primed for one. We'll see how he does. And then Ted Ginn and Devin Funchess, I mean, they just haven't done it, even though they've had the opportunities. So I'd avoid them at all costs. But like you, Keith, I'll take the Saints at home.
All right, the Baltimore Ravens travel to the New York Giants. And the Ravens, like we said, fired their offensive coordinator, Mark Trestman. If you're a Bears fan, there's no love lost there at all. But looking at how these teams set up, the Giants have struggled offensively as well. Neither team likes to score. Defensively, the Giants, though, have been shredded. 358 yards per game, giving up 3 touchdowns a game. The defense on Baltimore has been a little bit stiffer. The Giants have a lot of proving to do, but they're home, and it does make a difference. The Ravens with a new offensive coordinator, I just don't think they put it together this game. I'm just going to take the Giants because they're home.
This was a tough game for me to look at. I'm waiting for these Giants to break free and break out. And the Baltimore Ravens defense has still been pretty stout. I mean, they're borderline top 5 in most fantasy leagues. And, as an index, is a way to sort of evaluate how the defense is doing. They're doing pretty good. And the Giants are just struggling, and there's no sort of solution in sight. If they're going to beat the Ravens, the only thing they really have is to throw the football, because the Ravens are number 2 against the rush. Okay, Manning starts throwing the football, and that hasn't gotten him in too many good places. I'm going to take the Ravens on the road here. The way this sets up is with Marty Morningwig, now the offensive coordinator. We're going to see a huge dose of the running game. We're going to see a lot of Terrence West. Hopefully we get to see some Kenny Dixon this week, monitor his situation, because this whole knee brace thing has me a little bit concerned, especially since he only had, I think, 3 carries last week. But we'll see a lot of Terrence West, and we're going to see them throw the football down the field. And the way it stands right now for the Ravens is Dennis Pitta is going to be a start. There'll be a TE1. And in terms of wide receivers, we've got Steve Smith, who it's sounding like he is not going to play. Mike Wallace showed up today with a non-contact jersey due to some sort of a rib injury. I'm assuming he'll still play, but if for some reason he doesn't, now suddenly Kamar Aiken moves up in terms of the pecking order. And whoever's that top dog for the Ravens this weekend is a must-start in fantasy based on how the Giants are defending the position. I'm going to go out on the limb and call this one for the Ravens, even though I think it's tough to win on the road. I like your pick, Keith, but I'm going to play against the Giants because they just haven't proven themselves to me. And the Ravens, I think, are just a slightly better team after what happened last weekend with the firing of Mark Tressel.
I can't disagree with your pick. It's just I just don't know what to think of them. All right, the Cleveland Browns at the Tennessee Titans. The Browns are trying to set records for the amount of quarterbacks they can get killed. They are now on their 206th starting quarterback this season. It's pretty impressive. The Tennessee Titans last week went out in Miami and walloped the Dolphins 30-17. They flogged the Dolphin. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Oh, God. See, I wasn't going to laugh. I was going to make it through it till you started laughing. Then it was over. I don't like the Browns defensively, basically. And while the Titans by no means light it up offensively, I don't think the Browns have done enough. They're giving up 30 points a game. And they're going to Tennessee. I'm going to take the Titans at home.
I am too. This is a game that really sets up well for the Titans after the kind of win that they had last week where their offense was just clicking on all cylinders. I know there's some projections that this will be a low-scoring game, but I think potentially what it's going to be is a lopsided game where the Titans put up a bunch of points and the Browns don't. The Titans' defense is much better than Bill, and I think they're only getting better as the season progresses. The Cleveland, obviously they've had their issues at quarterback with all the injuries. It sounds like Cody Kessler is going to make the start this week, but he's banged up. So if he goes out, then suddenly the kid who was just on the practice squad gets the start, and that can't be good. So from a fantasy perspective, the Titans' defense is a must-start this week. They are my number one streaming defense. So if I'm trying to think of a good example of a defense where you may want to go get. So if you had the Vikings on the bye, go get the Titans and start them with confidence this week. Marcus Mariota makes for a low-end QB1. He may not put up the numbers he did last week, but it should still be pretty good. I love DeMarco Murray this week. Delaney Walker gets the number one matchup of the week. The most fantasy points allowed at the tight end position come from the Cleveland Browns, so you start him with confidence. As far as the receivers for the Titans, it'd be hit or miss. You could start them in a deep 14 or 16 team league as a flex, but you're going to be hoping for the best. Maybe I'll come up with one of them as a deep sleeper come Thursday afternoon on USA Today, but we'll see. I'm not sure that I feel that confident about who to pick. For the Browns, Terrell Pryor, he's going to be a jack of all trades this weekend potentially. So there's there's something there if you need him. Gary Barnidge, if you need him, he should be good for 50 to 70 yards receiving. Isaiah Crowell, if you need him, he should be a low-end RB2 or a flex play. But all around, this could actually be a really rough game for the Browns. I'm taking the Titans.
Philadelphia Eagles travel to the Washington Redskins, and there is nothing better than a middle-of-the-season division rivalry where both teams are on the up and up. The Washington Redskins, winners of their last three at 3-2. The Philadelphia Eagles, with their first loss of the season coming off a bye in Detroit last week, they sit at 3-1, both of them looking up at the Dallas Cowboys, BT Dubs. So, looking at what do we know about these teams so far? Well, Carson Wentz seems like the real deal, right? They are throwing for 245 yards per game, and they're also running for another 118. The Redskins are throwing for 280 a game, and while the Eagles score 28 a game, the Redskins aren't that far behind at 23. Looking at the defense, though, the Eagles' defense, aside from last week, and let's be honest, they gave up 24 points in Detroit to an offense that can score. Detroit's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but that offense under Jim Bob Cooter is pretty effective. The Eagles' defense, though, aside from last week, has been pretty much lights out, only giving up 73 yards a game on the ground. They're also only giving up less than 200 per game through the air. And they're only giving up 13 points per game, slightly under that, on defense. This is going to be a really interesting matchup to watch because if the wrong version of the Redskins show up, this could get ugly fast. I just think the Eagles are better defensively. I'm going to take the Eagles on the road.
Keith, I am too. And despite what happened last week to the Eagles, this is still a good Eagles defense. And when you look at the statistical production of their opponents, it's really hard to find a good matchup in this game for anybody in a Redskins uniform. I mean, you're going to start Jordan Reed because he's really talented at his position, and he could certainly put up 50 to 70 yards in a score, which makes him a worthwhile play. But in terms of the wide receivers, the running game, and Kirk Cousins, this is a week to avoid all of them. On the Eagles side, I'm not a big fan of Carson Wentz this week. I think this is a week where he won't be able to throw multiple TDs. It doesn't mean that you have to bench Jordan Matthews. Doesn't mean you have to bench Zach Ertz, even though last week was a huge disappointment, coming off his injury and basically doing nothing in terms of fantasy production. You can hang in there with him unless you clearly have a better play. The guy that I really like this week is going to be Ryan Matthews. I talk about him on the fantasygreek.com in our running back stardom article, which you can look at on our homepage or under the stardoms tab on the navigation bar. But I love him in this. I mean, I think they're giving up somewhere about 165 all-purpose yards and 1 TD to the position overall. That suggests he should be good for at least 100 yards in a score. Maybe one of the other running backs could do some damage, but it's all Ryan Matthews, and I consider him a solid RB2 this week. I'm going to take the Eagles on the road.
Kansas City Chiefs travel to the Oakland Raiders. Looking at these two teams, again, an AFC West matchup. The Raiders are 4-1. The Chiefs are 2-2, looking to put some kind of back-to-back performance together. They've won. They lost to the last 3 games. They've lost to the Texans. They beat the Jets. They lose to the Steelers, and then they had a bye. So hopefully they've coming off the bye and they've put it all together. But looking at them statistically, the Raiders' offense just is more effective, 391 yards per game, scoring 28 per game. The Chiefs, on the other hand, just under 21 per game, much more methodical on offense than the Raiders. Look at them defensively. This would be a trap. This would be a dangerous game for the Raiders. They give up 450 yards total, 450, 330 on average through the air, and another $122 on the ground. The one thing that the Raiders have going for them is that they're holding opponents to a 31% third down completion. And at home against a division matchup, that's enough to get me to pick them. I'm picking the Raiders.
Yeah, this is an odd game for me. I'm going to take the Raiders as well. The game itself projects to be a high-scoring game based on what we've seen of the Raiders' defense, which seems to be non-existent, and then the Chiefs' defense, which in Week 1 was awful, and then slowly they turned it around, and then the Steelers just destroy them. So, it looks like it should be a high-scoring game, and I think that's the way you have to view it. But there's always this risk that it ends up being a low-scoring game because these are two teams that they've played many times. I know the personnel's not the same, but, they're going to play hard against each other. So that's what makes it very interesting for us and for their fans. So I'm going to take the Oakland Raiders. everything projects as a high-scoring game from both sides. You've got to start, Derek Carr. I mean, he's easily a top 10 play. You're going to start Amari Cooper. Michael Crabtree has just been outstanding. In terms of the running game, it's unclear whether Latavius Murray is going to play or not. Based on his turf toe, I guess he's out of his walking boot. But whether or not he's going to practice effectively remains to be seen. If you've got to pick between these running backs, I think the running back for the Raiders that is the best is Jalen Richard, only because he's just more productive with all of his touches. I think he averages around 8 yards per touch. Compared to the other running backs, which are more 4 or 5 yards per touch. So that gives him more upside. In a PPR, he's much better because he's the receiving running back, and it gives him more potential to score. On the Chiefs side, man, I want to start Alex Smith. I want to get him. I want to put him in every fantasy lineup and tell you that he's just going to blow it up, because here's a Raiders team that can give up 2 to 3 passing TDs no matter what. But the problem is the Chiefs tend to be a run-first offense. Jamal Charles is due back this week. And if this becomes a defensive battle, we're not going to see Alex Smith throw a ton. We're only going to see him throw a ton if they fall behind. So that's my nervousness. But I still like him a bunch. I like him ahead of Matt Ryan. I like him ahead of Phillip Rivers, because there's some quarterbacks that have pulled such bad matchups that you might as well give it a go with Alex Smith, because everything's in his favor. Jamal Charles, as I mentioned, is due back this week, which certainly puts Spencer Ware's value into question. He's probably at best a flex play. Jamal Charles in RB2 until we see what he's really got. Jeremy Maclin, this is a great matchup. I can't believe more people aren't talking about it. I mean, he's got the number 1 matchup of all wide receivers this league. He is a must start. Somehow you have to play him. Travis Kelce, it's not the number 1, but it's damn near close. So he again too is a must start, and he should actually produce really well for you. As far as the defenses are concerned, forget about it. I'm going to take the Raiders. Raiders silver and black, baby. Black.
The Dallas Cowboys travel to the Green Bay Packers for 4 o'clock game, 4:25. The 4-1 Cowboys, the 3-1 Packers. Looking at these teams offensively, both pretty eclectic, except the Cowboys are rushing for $155 on average on the ground. Something's got to give here, though, because the Packers are only giving up 42 yards per game rushing. They haven't really played any teams that have sound running offenses, but tip your cap to them. 42 yards is 42 yards. They're both similar as far as scoring defense goes. The Packers giving up 20.8 a game. The Cowboys 18.2. This game is in Green Bay, and if the Cowboys can't run the ball, that's going to put an awful lot of pressure on that rookie quarterback, who has not played a bad game yet. And I think this is the first big ask of Mr. Dak Prescott. I'm going to take the Packers at home.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Packers too at home, but I think Dak Prescott will look better than we all suspect. And
I don't think he's going to look bad. To ask him to go into Lambeau and win a game might be.
But see, I think he can do it. It's the funny thing. I mean, this isn't. He's not. I mean, the traditions and the things that make people worry about going into Lambeau and playing a football game don't really apply to a young kid who's never been there before. It's his first football game. Everything's new. And so far, with everything that's been new, he's been doing pretty darn well. In any case, I'm taking the Packers too. They should just light the Cowboys up. They've got so many injuries in their secondary. This is a great opportunity for Jordy Nelson to just have a huge game. It's even a better opportunity for Randall Cobb to follow up the great game that he had last week. Now, it turns out he had that huge hit right at the end of the game and was cleared from a concussion, but now they're kind of talking he might have a neck injury. And maybe what it is, he just needed a day or two for his neck to stiffen up, and suddenly it's like, I can't move it, or I'm not moving well. So there's an opportunity here for Devontae Adams to step up and become the number 2 wide receiver in this offense and to make some noise, which, by the way, I mean, in three of the 4 games he's played, he's caught a touchdown. So even though he's not getting a bunch of yards, let's say 30 to 40, 50 yards per game, I mean, that TD is putting him over the top in terms of fantasy relevancy, so he's a decent flex play, especially in deeper leagues. I don't like this game for Eddie Lacy. I mean, this is a Cowboys team that doesn't put up a whole bunch of points on the board, and yet they're top 5, top 10 against the position. And, with them throwing the football, I mean, I wouldn't bench him, but I just don't know that you're going to see the big lights out production you might be thinking you're going to get from him in this particular game. For the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, he's a solid QB2. In 2 quarterback leads, I wouldn't fear this game. In fact, because the score is going to get so high, he's going to be forced to throw the football. So I like that for him. Even though the Packers don't give up a lot of yards on the ground, that's really due to the fact that they push teams into throwing the football. Ezekiel Elliott's going to get 30 touches no matter what. So you start him with confidence as a top 10 wide receiver. I love Cole Beasley again this week. Now that he scored 1 touchdown and smelled that end zone, I think it's perfectly fine for him to smell it again. You've got to like Terrence Williams as a flex play in this game. And even Jason Witten. Again, the Cowboys are going to have to throw the football, and that opens up some fantasy opportunities. The question is, do you need to take the risk with those players, with the exception of Ezekiel Elliott and Cole Beasley? But the Packers, they're going to rule it at home. Packers win.
The Atlanta Falcons travel to the Seattle Seahawks, and the Falcons, tip your cap offensively. They're scoring 35 points per game. That's like Madden-type stats in the NFL. Reeling off 457 yards of offense per game, 333 through the air, another $124 on the ground. They're going against, really, in my opinion, an even bigger test than they faced last week in Denver. Yes, Denver's defense is no joke, and they still put up 23 points. But I like the physicality of Seattle's defense better than I do the Broncos. It's like 1 and 1A, if you ask me personally. This game does not set up well for the Falcons on the road. I know they were on the road last week, and they fared pretty well. But the Seahawks are averaging 80 yards a game on the ground and only a $183 through the air. And they're giving up less than 2 touchdowns per game and holding teams to less than a 33% third down conversion. I'm taking the Seahawks at home.
I'm taking the Seahawks too. The Falcons are going to eventually run into a buzzsaw, and I think it's the Falcons. I mean, the Falcons, have they been given up a passing TD? If they have, it's 1. Yeah, they've given up 1 passing TD on 805 yards passing through 4 games. That's ridiculously good. And so Matt Ryan, for me, is benchable in most standard size leagues, so 10-team leagues, 12-team leagues, maybe 14. But in a 16-team league, if you got him, I think you're going to play him. He's done well enough. He'll get 1 pass TD, but can he get 2? Everything else is all bets are off. And I lean to the Seahawks because the Falcons' defense hasn't been that great. And Russell Wilson, who, again, no one's really talking about the fantastic game he should have. I mean, it should be lights out. Him, Christine Michael, Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett, Jimmy Graham, start them all. For the Seahawks defense, I think you keep starting them. I mean, you're going to take the bad with the good when you drafted that team. And whatever the bad is this week, it isn't going to be the bad that you're going to see, let's say, with the Panthers this week. So feel good about that. For the Falcons, we've already talked about Matt Ryan. I think this is a tough game for Devonta Freeman. Tevin Coleman last week was just an amazing game, but it doesn't mean he's going to have an amazing game this week. I would view him more as a low-end RB2 flex play, which is probably how you're playing him in general. Julio Jones, keep playing him. This is a tough matchup, but I will remind you, when the Jets were playing the Seahawks, I thought Brandon Marshall was going to get shut out, but that didn't happen. They had to go to him, and they did, and he did enough to get 70 to 80 yards, and they went to him in the red zone, and he got a score. That's how good Julio Jones is. So I wouldn't give up on Julio Jones this week, but as far as everybody else, I would avoid him on the Falcons. I think the Seahawks are going to win, baby.
The Indianapolis Colts travel to the Houston Texans. The Colts, you look at the AFC South, the Colts at 2-3, the Texans sitting at the top of the division at 3-2. This is a big game early on as they battle for intergalactic supremacy. The Colts offensively, looking at 268 per game through the air. They're scoring almost 4 touchdowns a game, guys. I mean, but the problem with the Colts is their offensive line, and as far as pass protection, more than anything, they're almost rushing for about 100 yards per game. They're at 90. the Texans have broken the century mark on average, but the Texans have struggled to score. The Colts' defense, though, doesn't usually pose all that much resistance, giving up almost 30 points per game. The difference maker here is that the Texans are much better. They play much better team pass defense, only giving up 181 yards per game through the air, only giving up 20.8 points per game. On the road, I just don't think there's enough in the Colts tank to beat the Texans. I'm going to take Houston at home.
And, I'm going to go against, I think, what most people are calling a Texans home win. I'm going to take the Colts on the road. And I think you said a few of the things for me, Keith. The 3 to 4 touchdowns per game the Colts are putting up. The Texans, I think they're struggling in their pass defense. And I just looked at the injury to J.J. Watt. Game 1, 5 sacks. Game 2, 4 sacks. Game 3, 1 sack. Game 4, 1 sack. Game 5, 2 sacks. And I can't say that the offensive lines of these teams were all that great, whether it be the Patriots, the Titans, or the Vikings in the past 3 games. And Andrew Luck has had enough time to play behind this offensive line that's sort of learning on the job that he's going to be just fine. So I think there's a potential for a high-scoring game. The Texans, some of their fantasy players are going to come alive this week, folks. So Colts, you're starting Andrew Luck. You're definitely starting Frank Gore. He's one of my stardoms this week. This is a great matchup for the running back position. I'm predicting a touchdown for him. T.Y. Hilton, Philip Dorsett. I don't like this for Dwayne Allen. If he does something, it's really going to be by accident. For some reason, the Texans, they just shut down the tight end position, so I would avoid him at all possible. On the Texans side, I'm not going with Brock Osweiler. I don't care if he can put up 2 TDs against these guys. He just scares me in terms of his overall production, in terms of his turnovers. But I am going to go with Lamar Miller, who I think is a top start this week. If you drafted him as your number 1 running back this week, he will remind you why you did that. DeAndre Hopkins should come alive this week. It just matches up well. We saw what Alshon Jeffrey and Cameron Meredith did last week. And I love Will Fuller. And that's sort of how everything rounds out in terms of fantasy. And in reality, Colts win.
All right, we're going to run a little bit over. We've got about 3 minutes and change left in the program, but we got one more game to get to. The New York Jets travel to the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals going to get Carson Palmer back this week, which bodes well. Last week, the Cardinals beating the 49ers 33-21. But looking at the teams offensively, they actually, as far as yardage goes, they match up pretty evenly, but the Cardinals have been able to score a little bit more. The Jets have struggled, only scoring 18.4 points per game. The Cardinals up at 25. Defensively, though, something's got to give here because while the Jets rush for $1.04 a game offensively, the Cardinals give up $1.18 per game, and the Jets are much more stout against the run, which puts a lot more pressure, obviously, on Carson Palmer. Yes, I think he's up to it. The Cardinals defensively, though, only giving up 20 points per game. The Jets 27.2 points per game, but only $1.89 through the air. That's likewise going to put a lot of pressure on Matt Forte and the Jets' running game. This game is in Arizona on a Monday night. The Cardinals are still looking for some sense of rhythm, and I think they find a little bit. The Jets, unfortunately, being outscored by over 40 points total on the season, they need a big shot of mojo. They don't get it here. I'm picking the Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same. This is a get-right game for the Cardinals. I see it as a decent scoring game. The Jets, their pass defense has just struggled just terribly. But, David Johnson is just the number 1 fantasy player as far as I'm concerned. And we were right by him when the season started. Larry Fitzgerald has just shown how good he can be with a good quarterback throwing to him. One of our top stardoms this week is going to be John Brown because while the Jets are trying to shut down Larry Fitzgerald, John Brown is going to be running some deep routes and under routes, and Carson Palmer's going to be hitting them all day. So you go ahead and you get him started with confidence in some way in your lineup. And start the Cardinals defense at home. I mean, what a great place to play for any defense is playing at home. So start them with confidence this week. You're going to start Matt Forte because he's just such a versatile player overall. He may not put up the greatest of stats, but there's no reason why he can't get a score. Brandon Marshall, there's no reason why he can't get a score because that's who Ryan Fitzpatrick's throwing the football to. I don't care if it's Patrick Peterson. I don't care who it is. Brandon Marshall has time and time again proven he is, if not the best wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers when it comes to beating your opponent. Certainly Quincy Nunwa, your guy, Keith. I don't see any reason why you can't play him either, but if you're starting him, it's going to be in a deeper league. And Ryan Fitzpatrick, this is a game he should throw a couple of TDs, but it's just so difficult because of how erratic he's been in such a short period to tell you to start him with confidence, because you just can't. I can think of easily 12 to 14 players to start ahead of him, and at least one of those 12 to 14 players is either your starter or a backup to Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I'm taking the Cardinals, Keith, in a get-right game for the Phoenix Fandom.
The Phoenix Fandom. It's just got a nice ring to it, you know.
Does it?
And with that, that's it, folks. That's Week 6 in a nutshell. We're here every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We're here at LateNightSportsRadio.com. You can find us on demand afterwards at LateNightSportsRadio.com, Spreaker.com, iTunes, TheFantasyGreek.com. Throughout the week, head over to TheFantasyGreek.com for all the up-to-date news and info. Also, hit up the Twitter, hashtag AskTFG. That's AskTFG. And Jim will get you all of your fantasy football advice in a timely manner. Good luck, everyone, and may the odds be forever in your favor.